of the division, and there is so many storylines around this team. And I'll start with you, Connor. But for me, it's quite a lot of negative stuff going on. I mean, we've seen recently over the past week the storylines come out that McDermott took ownership of the defensive calls with 13 seconds to go in that playoff game, and it's kind of caused a little bit of animosity with Leslie Frazier, and that's kind of one of the underlining issues as to why he walked away from the team. And then you've got Stefan Diggs, who last year on a number of times was a bit outspoken. We saw Thanksgiving Day, the end of the playoff game, and then last week was a bit strange. I know we spoke about it. He's here, he's not here. Sean McDermott kind of had to backtrack on what he said the first day and said, "Oh no, I was aware he was here." Just doesn't feel like it's the Bills of the last couple of years. Whilst they have a great team, it doesn't feel like everything is, right inside in the organization.
No, it doesn't. And you'd have to say, and I'll put my cards on the table here, if you'd asked me before last season, I'd pick the Bills to win the Super Bowl. I thought it was going to be a Bills 49ers Super Bowl and that the Bills would win. So I was wrong on pretty much all counts there. Are they in better shape this year than they were last year? I don't think so. They're one of the teams in this division that I look at and go, to put it kindly, they've plateaued and they may even be slipping backwards here. I mean, when they signed Von Miller last year, you thought, yeah, that's kind of like we were talking about the Rams. That's a team going for that one extra piece because they really feel that they just need to add one more element to push them over the top, and they're really going to go for it this year. And they were slightly unlucky there because he got injured, obviously, on Thanksgiving and didn't come back and doesn't look to be fully back either. Might not actually start week 1 for them, which will be a concern. Even when they do get him back, though, it's almost like adding a new player in, given the impact he could make, bearing in mind that we have to see at his age whether he comes off the injury in full power, and that is something of a question mark. Apart from that, they haven't moved in the offseason like a team, like you would expect a team to, if they really want to push it and put all the chips in the center of the table. They haven't. They've been linked to DeAndre Hopkins, who looks like the kind of player you would think that an offense like this would want to slot in as that one extra guy, the Odell Beckham Jr. as the Rams had, or the Antonio Brown that the Bucs had, or pick whichever other example you want that just gets you there and gives you that extra dimension to cut it through and go over the top. But they haven't done that, and now you're dealing with all the off-season stuff that you quite rightly point out. Stefan Diggs isn't happy. Leslie Frazier doesn't look like he was happy. And this play calling on both sides of the ball now seems to be an issue. Diggs doesn't like the way the plays are being called as a wide receiver, although nothing new there. Wide receivers who don't get targeted on every single play will always have a problem with the offensive coordinator and with the play calling, if particularly if the team doesn't win. But, I mean, those 2 playoff games last year, to me, kind of were said very worrying signs about who they are. They were very lucky to get over the Dolphins ultimately, and undermanned Dolphins without Tua, as we've just talked about. And the Bengals, we mentioned it when we were talking about the North, went into their building and just handled them. I mean, they got thrown around there. They were 17-point defeat. They were embarrassed. They never looked remotely competitive in that game for all that they had shaped up as Super Bowl contenders before the season. So I don't know, has that just put the doubts in their mind? Has that, maybe shattered some of the unity that they have and some of the sense of purpose that they have? Apart from everything else, given the situation with Damar Hamlin, you would have thought that this was a team that was galvanized going into the playoffs and would really have the sword as sharp as it could possibly be. And it ended up being completely blunted in that, very humbling loss in their own building. Like, I really see these as a team that, no secrets of where I'm going here, is not going to be in the same place that they were last year. I don't see them as the same level of contender that they were. They're still a dangerous team. They've still got so many pieces in place and talent on all sides of the ball, but something seems to be dimmed there, that the light isn't burning as bright, and I remain to be convinced otherwise.
Connor rightly calls it with Von Miller. They brought in Jordan Phillips, Shaq Lawson, the players that have been around there before and returned to the team. And I suppose they're trying to build a stability there within the defense, because we did see in quite a few games towards the end of the season that they just didn't perform at the level we saw earlier in the season. I think one of the standout acquisitions is Conor McGovern, the offensive line is coming from the Cowboys, one of the marquee offensive line guys on the market last March. Where are you on this? Are you concerned? Like, we saw Josh Allen at times, even in that Bengals game, he was very argumentative with Bengals, but I get the intensity of a game, but like he didn't seem right at times last season. He seemed to be up and down. It was the Jets game as well, where he was shown. We spoke about needless interceptions last year. We touched on whether it was the Brian Dable effect that he'd moved on and he had a different offense coordinator and things just never seemed to be. He didn't seem to, for me, be the same assured quarterback we saw under Dable. Is that fair to say? Do you think that was the case last year?
Yeah, but I think there were reasons for it, right? I think the 13 seconds played on their mind so much last year, right? Think about the way they opened the season last year. That first game, they played, and I've said it before, but I've said it again, they played with their hair on fire. They were sensational in that opening game, and they looked. And you know, I had them I had them and the Eagles in the Super Bowl. They were favorites. They were, you know, people looked at them in the AFC. They were the favorites to get to the Super Bowl, and they came out in that first game, and they looked like that was the case. But as the season went on, and remember all the stuff around the weather, you know, the players having to be picked up on snowmobiles in order to be taken to the airport. Everything just seemed to
thunder snow. There was thunder snow.
Thunder snow, yeah. I mean, games having to be played away. There were so many different factors in it. It just seemed to kind of wear them down. And Bill Barnwell had a really kind of interesting piece around the way in which Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs responded to the too high shell look. Right, because the Chiefs obviously moved on from Tyreek Hill, and what the Chiefs did was, instead of getting standouts other than Kelsey, because he just can't cover Kelsey, but with the receivers, they made it so that, like previously, it was okay, if we can shut Hill down, that takes the deep option away, and ultimately the other guys aren't good enough. Whereas last year, the receivers were all good enough to require you to cover them. Right. And that's very difficult for a defense to do it. And what they also did was they moved off of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and we've talked about it before, they brought in an absolute bruiser of a running back. Right. And so you can take advantage, therefore, of the lighter boxes, and you force teams into not being able to play the too high shell all the time. And then when Patrick Mahomes gets the opportunity, the Bills, it depends on have they learned the lesson. Right. So, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs did will Josh Allen. Last year, he forced it too much, right? And if he didn't see it open, he took off running. That was all they seemed to do. Now, they have brought in Damian Harris in the offseason. They've made some changes to the O-line. The Diggs thing is an interesting piece, and I would love to know what happened exactly. We don't know. But to me, I suppose the fact that they brought in Dalton Kincaid in the first round is an indicator that they're going to change it. They're going to look for a lot more power up in their offensive plan for the new season. I think they'll change how they approach it. I mean, Connor pointed out that Von mightn't start the season. I think they'd be okay with that, right? Because last year, again, Von was there from the off. Like Von Miller and the likes of Frank Clark last year, those type of players come alive really in the playoffs. That's where you want those guys to come alive. And they kind of wasted it last year. So I think they'd be quite happy, you know, to have a Von come in maybe towards the back end of the season. So I think they need to take a different approach. But there are things. I mean, that the fact that McDermott took over the 13 seconds, that's only coming out now. Yeah, there are certain things that worry me. There are other moves that they've made that I can say, yeah, that makes sense. We'll have to see how things kind of play out in training camp and early in the season. But I think their approach will be different this year.
And let's not forget to be in London week 5 against the Jags. But before that, I think you're talking about kind of tough schedule. I think they may have landed the easier start of the season. We touched on the Jets week 1, Raiders week 2, Commanders week 3, Dolphins week 4. I could see a scenario where they could be at least 3-1 going to London potentially. I'll just ask you before we wrap up, who are your favourites for the division? I know I'm in the betting aspect of what's out there, but right now, bearing in mind everything that's been done this offseason, do you still see the Bills as slight favourites? I think Connor, I'm going to get the impression you're not leaning that way. Are you going with it? Would you see the Jets as the favourites?
Tough one. It's
a tough one.
They're the obvious favourites on paper, but kind of like, you know, the the Lions rather being the obvious favourites in the NFC North. I find it hard given the evidence of everything we've seen in our NFL following time to get behind that. I'm going to be brave here and say I think the Dolphins will win the division.
Here's your wild card in June, Colin. Not necessarily a pick, just who you think is the favourites.
I think as we sit here today, I still have the Bills as the favourites because there's not enough there for me to say that the others have stepped forward enough. It's until you prove it. I think the others have certainly crept up, and maybe but maybe not being the favorites helps the Bills in some way. Like, I don't think the Chiefs being the favorites, right, for the AFC and for the Super Bowl impacts the Chiefs in any way, shape, or form. There are certain teams, be it in the NFL, be it in the Premier League, the World Cup, even in the All-Ireland, right? Certain teams enjoy being the favorites and are fine with it, and other teams almost need to be an underdog. There need to be that perceived kind of us against the world a little bit. Like, remember the Patriots looking to create that, right? Remember the "we're still here" nonsense. The plucky Patriots with Tom Brady and all his rings that he had at that time, and Gronk and everything else. We're still here. And sometimes teams kind of need that almost. So it might suit the Bills. To me, they remain favorites. But again, you never know what happens in training camp, what happens with Diggs. That could be different when we're sitting here doing our kind of season preview in August.
I'll remind you on that point, though, Colin, of Travis Kelce's outburst after the Chiefs beat the Bengals. Like, they had talked themselves into being perceived as underdogs in their own building last year because it suited their own narrative.
True. Though you didn't necessarily, you saw Travis do that. You didn't see Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes kind of buy into
nobody gets
same.
a word in once Travis gets the microphone. Anyway, we saw that at the White House.
I think they're very happy to have Travis be the clown in that situation.
Well, look, I will lean Bills as well slightly. I think the Jets probably should be favourites, genuinely based on what they've done, but I think the outside noise and the expectation that comes with it might just be a bit too much for the team over the course of the season. Colin says we're still here. We are still here. We're coming up to an hour, and I said at the start of this episode, this is probably the most talked about division last year and this year for the next season, and that's when reflective of the fact that we did an hour. Colin, I really appreciate your time as we covered the AFC East. Great episode.